Oh boy, the loss. This is one of the rare examples of an episode that I personally struggle to find something useful in. Now, there are some minor story beats that are kind of cool in this one, but the general plot of this episode is such a weird, out there, abstract nonsense plot device that I just find myself struggling to find a reason to want to even try using it for something. Like, okay, so the main threat is the cosmic string, which under normal circumstances, the crew would just simply fly around it and ignore its existence for the most part. Cosmic strings are kind of sort of like quantum singularities, except they're generally, well, they're just not the shape of a tiny ball, and they don't have an accretion disk. Instead, they have this aura of gas and dust that they've gravitationally attracted to their really, really long, spindly whatever. Well, this episode asks, what if there were two-dimensional beings that were native to cosmic strings that could leave the cosmic string, fly around the universe, and then fly back to the cosmic string after annoying people? And what would happen to a Federation starship if the Federation starship got stuck in a group of those two-dimensional beings as the two-dimensional beings were flying back? The answer is apparently that the Federation starship is almost completely helpless and might as well just sit along and wait for the two-dimensional beings to let go of them. Hopefully before they impact the cosmic string. Hopefully. Yeah, the idea of two-dimensional life forms that aren't native to three-dimensional space is a very, I want to say it's an interesting science fiction concept, but what they do with it in this episode is incredibly boring. And it also makes them kind of sort of like super beings because the fact that scanning three-dimensional space for beings like this doesn't actually work under normal circumstances. The only way they were able to detect their presence is by the way that they interacted with the force of gravity. And it's this graviton field that was dragging the Enterprise into the cosmic string. Yeah, here is the only actual picture we ever got of the things. Little specks illuminated by a graviton sweep. Yee. And somehow the Enterprise is unable to escape from them. Sure. Okay. Like I said before, there are certain episodes where I personally struggle to find a good use for the episode. This was one of the episodes where the um, negative space wedgie was something so off the wall and ridiculous that I personally couldn't take it seriously when I was watching the episode. Let's see here. As other things, this episode really doesn't have much of a B plot either. The A plot is actually not the uh is a side effect of the danger of this episode. The danger is, of course, getting shoved into a quantum whatever thingy that you would normally be able to just stay light years away from and not never even go near. Well, also the presence of these beings, because there's literally millions of them. Like seriously, each of these orange dots is supposed to be a separate sentient life form. All of these orange dots are supposed to be individual sentient life forms. So that all of this group of two-dimensional beings overloads Deanna Troy's empathic senses and makes her psychically blind for the duration of the episode. That's what the um, uh, episode title is referring to. Her loss of her abilities. They're not really lost. It's just that she's like the psychic equivalent of being deaf for the entire time these things are around her because it's just too much. Which, you know, a bit of a problem to say the least. Let's see here. Huh. Okay, so this actually is being saved as a JPEG. Good to know. Whatever. Anyway, um, this idea of microscopic life forms that are realistically the way the episode portrays it, individually, these beings are no threat to the Enterprise at all. It's the fact that there's literally millions or maybe even billions of them. In the episode, they basically are like, I don't know, there's a lot. Yeah, the censors say there's a lot of them. We're not really sure how many. Because like the reason this thing is suspiciously round is that that's just the area around the ship that they illuminated to force the beings to be in a state where they can be counted and seen. They didn't actually illuminate the area outside this ring. How many of them are outside there? Good question. Yeah, that's the other thing. Is that the way this is presented, you just have to like sit there and scratch your head. It's like, okay, so if this is something that's just normal for this particular um form of life, why is this the first time anyone's ever run into it? And of course, the episode's like, we don't know. Now, okay, the idea here is that space is weird and has things in it that people would never see if they never left their planet. Is fundamentally a very good idea, honestly. That is one of my positive takeaways of this one, is that making space have weird stuff that people don't understand is actually a very good idea. Two-dimensional life forms that are invisible to normal sensors is kind of dumb, in my opinion. Because like their logic behind the two-dimensional life forms is that they functionally have a thickness of 0, which means they are not one atom thick. They are a completely different form of matter entirely that is completely two-dimensional and has no thickness when it is somehow intruding in three-dimensional space, which is batshit. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, functionally, the only thing that they interact with is gravitons, and the way that they move is to create a rather potent graviton field. And that the Enterprise didn't immediately notice when it got stuck in the graviton field by, we don't know. Realistically, it's like the logic behind how the Enterprise is unable to escape is because of the fact that the beings are traveling in a coherent graviton flow, and that having all of these millions or billions of them working together to create a graviton flow that's moving in a single cohesive direction, that is what is preventing the Enterprise from leaving, is because it's become stuck in the graviton field. And the graviton field is actually too powerful for it to escape, except that also the graviton field is not actually having a negative effect on the ship. It's just stuck in it. But convenient. Yeah, like I said, this is one of the episodes that I struggle to find things useful in because of the fact that it has such a strange focus on things that normally you wouldn't go with. They had to find ways to pad the script and shove in other things that you wouldn't normally see. Like, um, Deanna Troy has as her official position on the ship's counselor, and thus someone who is technically medical personnel, but someone who is more or less a uh, trained psychiatrist. And in her case, because of the fact that she's a betazoid, she uses her betazoid abilities to basically cheat when it comes to being a psychiatrist and read people's minds when normally, a person would have to guess at what someone was thinking. Granted, Troy is very good at what she does. However, in this episode, having her abilities suddenly crap out on her, she reacts very badly and considers quitting and just like resigning from her position and, you know, giving up on having a Starfleet career because she lost her ability to read people's minds. Eh, does not make sense to me. Really doesn't. That was actually also one of the things about this episode that I found to be personally WTF inducing is that Diana's not really acting in a way that makes sense to me. I know it's one of those things. Where well, some people would probably think it was perfectly fine and stuff, but uh, I didn't personally find it to be all that interesting. However, because of the fact they spend so much time with the whole like counselor aspect of things, because most of the episodes, Deanna's kind of there. There are several episodes where she's a major character, but she's not really the focus and very often. Exceptions exist, obviously. But this is one of the rare examples of an episode that is focused on Diana and in a negative way. Didn't like that either. That is actually an aspect of this episode that would be very, very difficult to actually do something with, is because, as a general rule, the episode is a negative space wedgie episode where they're stuck inside the negative space wedgie and they can't see the negative space wedgie. And the Deanna Troy plot, while it takes up the majority of the episode, is actually just a side effect of the negative space wedgie. And her relationship with Janet Brooks, who is a low-ranking member of the Enterprise's crew, who has been having, emotional issues because her husband is dead, is to be fair, the whole Janet Brooks part of the story is actually pretty uh meaningful. It's something that's actually kind of cool. Like you could actually like have the players have a plot important NPC show up that they need to help with problems and deal with things and so on and so forth. Good idea. Maybe use the character later. Maybe not if you feel like it. Whatever. Uh, the whole cosmic string thing, though. Okay, it's one of those things where it's just like scripted plot device to give the cast a reason to do stuff, and it's also scripted as a thing that they would normally have no problems with whatsoever. And as they point out here, is that this one is 107 kilometers long. That sounds huge until you realize that the Enterprise D is also over 1 kilometer long. Yeah, big. It, it It is considerably larger than the Enterprise D, but not gigantic compared to a planet. It's actually much smaller than a planet. Anyway, though, so yeah, overall, this episode is one of those where adapting this episode would be I wouldn't try to directly adapt this one. There are certain plot devices that you could um use, like the whole like idea of a telepathic character becoming, temporarily unable to use their powers, and thus feeling a bit eh, because they just like lost because they're like telepathically blind. That is actually reasonable. And also, Dr. Crusher, when she's examining Diana, is able to detect that there is actually genuinely something wrong with them. The reason they can't use the warp drive, of course, is that the graviton field created by the two-dimensional beings, it causes the warp field to collapse anytime they attempt to engage it. Because if they haven't, they don't actually know why it's collapsing, so they can't compensate for it. If they actually kind of did it, if they figured out how to do it the right way, maybe they could actually just like engage the warp field and leave. But they haven't figured that out yet. Also, knowing them, they would probably be like, "Oh, we can't murder all of these innocent two-dimensional thingies that are possibly maybe sentient." That's actually another thing, is that at no point in the episode do they discern what level of intelligence they have. They know that they're something that interacts with Betazoid telepathy, which that's actually another interesting plot point here, is that telepaths can sense the existence of these things, even though normal sensor scans can't. They're not emanating any detectable energy. So, wait, so what is telepathy detecting if they're not emanating anything other than gravitational effects that um, a ship's sensors could detect? See, it's like in some works of fiction, the logic behind how telepathy works is basically something like electromagnetic fields interacting with each other. It's like in the real world, you can actually detect brainwave patterns from an individual. So normally, the methodology used in real world science, it involves very sensitive and very carefully applied sensors, because of the fact that getting a good reading realistically is subjective, and what they really want is readings that they can compare with the previous reading, so that taking the measurements exactly the same way every time is used simply because of the fact that if they have a different frame of reference each time they take the readings, they won't be able to compare the readings with each other properly. Anyways, this though, nothing. The logic behind how the two-dimensional beings are able to be sensed by telepaths is never explained, because they can't be sensed by anything else. Anything except gravitational effects. They do create a very powerful gravitational effect when they're in large enough groups. Okay. Again, this is the reason why I found this episode so kind of like incomprehensible, is that in many episodes, Star Trek treats telepathy as a mystical force that is completely incomprehensible. I brought this up in several episodes done before. Is that there's that one episode where there's a human and a alien he's never met, who are telepathically bonded to each other and just able to communicate with each other over a distance of light years, despite having never met each other. And how? It's basically magic, the way that it's written. And that is unfortunately something that comes up with telepathy a lot in Star Trek. Like, there are actually some episodes where they introduce the concept of drugs that can suppress telepathic powers. Except, as it turns out, a major side effect of those is that it just makes your behavior like apathetic, and like you're just like lost interest in everything or something. I forget the exact specifics. Oh well. But yeah, rant about the weird ways telepathy is handled aside. To be quite honest, due to the way telepathy was a major plot point, that's kind of relevant here. It's because the way that telepathy got used in this episode was a giant MacGuffin. It's like the negative space wedgie also causes anyone who is telepathic to get the telepathic equivalent of being blinded by a flash bomb. That's the best analogy I can think of. Is that Deanna Troy experienced the telepathic equivalent of being blinded by a flash grenade. I mean, it's temporary, but it is a real problem for her and something that she does not enjoy. Needless to say, though, if you're doing a story like this and a character has an issue like that, let the player resolve how their character behaves as a result. Don't, you know, force them to do this. Because quite frankly, this is dumb, anyways. Now, if it's an NPC and you, the game master, are the one controlling them, have fun. Do whatever. Anyways, though. So, making up your own negative space wedgies to fit with the whole basic concept of that space is vast and contains forces we don't understand. I actually generally like that. It's just that the specific implementation of it I thought was dumb. Anyway, though, that's about all I can think of to say about this episode. Like, it's an episode where most of the things that you see the cast doing kind of feel like the writers were like shoehorning them into the plot. Like they didn't really have a reason to be there, not a genuine reason to be there. They're kind of sort of acting like they have a reason to be there, but it's more that they're, like, oh, we need to put this person, this person, this person, this person, and this person into the episode so that all of the actors get a paycheck for having appeared in this episode. Which, for a GM, you do kind of often end up in games where you have an internal logic behind why the current crisis is focusing on a specific player. That is genuinely a thing that it comes up in games. Naturally, obviously, you're going to want to write them so that it's not tailored towards creating a situation like that, though. Oh well. Although I have to say is that their explanation for how the uh Enterprise got out of the gravitational flow is kind of amusing. Is that when they got close enough, the beings, which were somehow able to sense the presence of the cosmic string, the Enterprise, when it got close enough, reflected the appearance of the cosmic string long enough that the beings stopped forming a cohesive flow, and thus the Enterprise was able to get unstuck and get out of there before the beings jumped back into the cosmic string. Anyways, though, why exactly this is described as a homing beacon, I have no idea. Because the episode does not actually spend a whole lot of time trying to explain what life is like for these two-dimensional beings, because it spends most of its time trying to have the crew of the Enterprise figure out what the problem is. And, negative space wedgie plots where the real story is trying to understand what the negative space wedgie is, you know what? That's actually a good a plot hook. Like, oh, you things are going normal until you get stuck in a negative space wedgie. Have fun with that. Oh yeah. Why were they negatively beta system anyways? There is actually a sentient race there. And stellar cartography. Nope, doesn't say that they eventually became part of the Federation. Hmm. Dum dum dum. Oh, that's the Enterprise D was trying to go there. And presumably do diplomatic negotiations with them when they got snared in the uh, gravitational flow of the two-dimensional beings going to the cosmic string. Okay. So the presence of the Tlee Beta system is the reason the Enterprise got into the negative space wedgie. Hmm. Well, that's a reason to avoid a solar system. This solar system is too close to a negative space wedgie. You should avoid it. Well, you're avoiding the negative space wedgie by also avoiding the solar system. Hmm. Oh well. To be honest, they did kind of, sort of, in this episode, come up with a way of detecting these things. So you would expect them to not actually have that problem in the future because of the fact that negative space wedgies that you can avoid are negative space wedgies that you don't need to deal with. And that is actually something that is an interesting thing to remember when writing negative space wedgie plots. If your players figure out how to avoid the negative space wedgie before they get stuck in it, well, sometimes players just, win. And with that thought, I will say goodbye for now. See you later.